in their health authority.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it happens to be quite ironic that the Premier of this province stood in front of a podium 2 days ago with a sign that stated a proven record. Mr. Speaker, I think that record is broken. So my final question is to the Premier. How can the Premier look the people of Nova Scotia in the eye and state that ER closures of 9,758 hours last year alone represent a record in which he and his government are proud to stand behind?
The Honourable the Premier. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very proud of the fact that we have a team that will look at the concerns that exist, and as the Minister, I'm prepared to work with the communities, the DHA, and that's the process that I have begun, and as part of my mandate as Minister, I will continue that. And as I said earlier in one of my responses, the circumstances in each ER are different, the solutions will be different.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Nova Scotian children face multiple obstacles when attempting to access mental health services. Earlier this year, there was a code purple called at the mental health inpatient unit at the IWK because there were no available beds. Children were discharged before they were ready to go home. One even ended up in her local emergency room. Thank goodness that was open. My question for the Minister of Health is, why are you refusing to ensure that our children have timely access to the treatment they need in a safe environment?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there are more demands on our mental health services. Those continue to grow, and those are not unique to Nova Scotia. But I do want to say that the situation of which the member speaks has been discussed, as all circumstances have been with the District Health Authority, and I have been assured, and I believe, that no patient in need of help has been turned away.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotian children and youth are waiting too long for mental health treatment. That's a fact. The Minister allowed the number of children waiting for a first appointment with the IWK Mental Health and Addictions Program to reach 647 on March 31st, 2009. These youth and their families are waiting an average of 87.5 days, and that's just over 3 months. My question for the Minister of Health is, why do you think that 87.5 days is an acceptable period of time to leave children waiting for mental health treatment in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, there are a number of services in the mental health area that are available for youth in our province. Many of them are delivered through the district health authorities, and they do not require inpatient status. And those programs are expanding. We are putting money into those programs. So the number of people who do require assistance at the IWK Mental Health is reduced, and they are getting the service close to home through a program in their own DHA.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is not a new issue here. In fact, in the last session of this House, we asked the former Minister of Health what he was going to do to help these children. His response at that time was there were competing priorities within his department. My question is to the Minister, will you commit to making adolescent mental health a priority in your department now?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, it is true there are many competing programs looking for support through the Department of Health, but I can assure you that when the budget is presented, there will certainly be an acknowledgement of the needs in the mental health area.
The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Well, Mr. Speaker, it appears the 11th-hour government across the floor is attempting to come to the rescue once more. A few hours ago, government announced it was willing to buy 21,000 acres of the Irving land in Digby County. But all along, Mr. Speaker, But all along, Mr. Speaker, we're being told that government didn't have the money. They just couldn't afford it, Mr. Speaker. And yet here we are with the government on a white stallion galloping to save the day. My question for the minister, what has changed so quickly that allows you to make this offer other than an imminent election?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's one thing that I do want to make perfectly clear, and I guess the goal of this government is to ensure that as much of this land as possible remains accessible. Now, Mr. Speaker, the land acquisition budget for 2009-2010 has just been finalized, and within those parameters, within a balanced budget, we have committed the Department of Environment and the Department of Natural Resources to put forward a bid on 21,000 acres of land.
The Honourable the Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on February 27th, the Minister of Natural Resources said, if we had the resources, we'd be looking at this parcel of land. February 27th, the Minister of Environment said, we'd love to be able to purchase the Irving properties as a wilderness area, but there's only so much resources available. March the 30th, the Minister of Natural Resources again said, the province is not in any position to buy this property. And on April 2nd, the Minister of Community Services said, Irving has done a disservice to the province. And on April 9, 2009, the Premier himself said, perhaps the municipalities themselves would like to acquire that land. And lo and behold, by sheer miracle, the province comes up with an offer and funding today for 21,000 acres. My question for the Minister of Natural Resources, has this offer been in the works for some time, or is this just a proposal you put on a piece of paper after Cabinet this morning?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if the member opposite understood the budget process, he would realize that until those budgets are finalized, and if he chose to vote on that budget, which I hope that he will see to it so the people in Southwest Nova will have the opportunity to enjoy 21,000 acres of this land.
The Honourable the Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A token gesture, Mr. Speaker. A token gesture is all this is to try and silence Nova Scotians who believe Nova Scotians should own Nova Scotia. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, this weak symbol of a weak government's attempt to try and save important land in Nova Scotia is insulting. You betrayed Nova Scotians. You're not even sure, Mr. Speaker, that people will even be able to gain access to this land. It's a piecemeal offer made by a piecemeal government. My question to the minister, is the land you are offering to buy going to be accessible to all Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I guess what's really insulting here is that member opposite will not allow these people to have that right to access that if they do not vote for the budget. And Mr. Speaker, I spoke very firmly outside today that of this 21,000 acres, there would be roughly 25% that would be committed for conservation. And the remainder would definitely be, it's there for all Nova Scotians to enjoy for all purposes, recreation purposes, off-highway vehicling, hiking, camping, to be able to use and enjoy traditionally as they have in the past.
The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture. This past winter, lobster fishermen in Southwest Nova found the prices being offered made it difficult for fishing families to make ends meet. In order to secure a fairer price, they decided to bring their product directly to the consumer. I asked the department what rules would apply to fishermen selling directly to consumers at the roadside. And the response I received from the department said fishermen or a person selling on behalf of the fisherman could sell directly to the consumer and were not required to have either a seller's permit or a mobile vendor's permit. Mr. Speaker, my question is, what has changed between December and today to change the minister's mind?
The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly appreciate that question. Mr. Speaker, as we know, last fall there was a considerable amount of roadside selling of lobster in the province of Nova Scotia, which at that time the weather was colder, the the lobster would survive quite a bit longer, as well as this spring when the weather warms up, it's not so good. And Mr. Speaker, it was a decision that we made on behalf of all Nova Scotians who harvest, sell, and buy lobsters for this food safety of the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. So it was a health safety issue, and we put that in place. Thank you.
The honourable member for Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the spokesman for Northumberland Fishermen's Association, Ronnie Heitman, who called the move ridiculous and outrageous. Mr. Heitman also said that he was blindsided by the new rules and did not hear anything about the changes until he picked up the mail this Monday, just 3 days before his season opened. My question to the minister, why didn't the minister at the very least consult with the fishermen before springing these new requirements on them?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
And again, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the question. And Mr. Speaker, I guess as we all know, the permit process, it was a part of the Act of part of the Health Promotion Act, that it requires all vendors in the province of Nova Scotia that sell perishable goods, perishable food on the side of the road do need a permit. And Mr. Speaker, for the health and safety of the consumer of the province of Nova Scotia, the province made the decision to have everybody that sells have a permit. Mr. Speaker, we just can't have. We got to know exactly where the vendors are selling. With the purchase of a permit that allows the food specialists to be able to track and monitor where they're selling and what they're selling. So, Mr. Speaker, it was an issue of food safety, and we dealt with it.
The Honourable member for Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if these changes are so important, the process should have started a long while ago. The minister knows when the different seasons open, and he should also know when fishermen have to apply and wait 10 business days before a permit is issued. My question to the minister is, why has he handcuffed these lobster fishermen, providing them with these requirements only a few days before their season starts?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, surely the member opposite from Shelburne and the NDP party are not saying that we should be selling lobster that could possibly. They're risky. They're very risky. They're very risky is right. Selling products on the side of the road that are not healthy. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite should go around the province and talk to some of the fishermen, some of the associations that we deal with on lobster science, the good work that the government does with LFA 34 in Southwest Nova, the Fishermen and Scientists Association, the lobster hatchery down in Richmond County, the lobster hatchery in Pictou County. So, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite should check with those people and see the good work that we do on behalf of the fishermen in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ministerial briefing book provided to the current Minister of Health outlines her roles and responsibilities. One of these responsibilities is the development of a provincial plan for the health system that reflects the health needs of Nova Scotians. This minister has not shown Nova Scotians that she has a plan that meets their needs, Mr. Speaker. Instead, she has allowed ERs to close and wait times for surgeries to grow, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, when will you present Nova Scotians with a plan that actually reduces wait times for surgeries, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to tell all members of the House that every decision that's made out of the Department of Health and that I make as Minister is designed to improve the access that Nova Scotians have to quality health care in a timely fashion, and that will motivate me on all of my decisions.
The Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the previous Minister of Health said he had a plan for surgery wait times, but then had to explain that he wasn't actually able to track them, Mr. Speaker. My office gets regular calls from patients who, after waiting in pain, have had their surgeries cancelled or delayed. because of healthcare worker shortages and bed shortages, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, why are you allowing the health of Nova Scotians to be put at risk by the cancellations of their surgeries, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to remind everyone in the House that we work very closely with the federal government, and there are 5 national benchmarks on wait times that we try to meet. Those national benchmarks have been set, and all provinces are working towards them. Out of those 5 national benchmarks, Nova Scotia is meeting or exceeding the wait time in 4 of those.
The Honourable the Member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health contracted out surgeries so that Capital District Health Authority could be more productive. When this created a deficit at Capital Health, Mr. Speaker, this government refused to help. Instead, they forced the cancellation of over 1,100 surgeries, Mr. Speaker, which grew the wait times for surgeries. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, when will you honour your ministerial responsibilities and come up with a plan to deal with the long wait times and cancellations of surgeries?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the operation of the healthcare facilities in this province are the responsibility of the district health authorities, and perhaps the responsibilities of the DHAs would be something that, in addition to the responsibilities of the minister, that the member opposite should read.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, since this Premier was first elected in 2006, Nova Scotians have been forced to witness the deterioration of the correctional services in this province. Over that time period, we have seen 11 mistaken releases, 2 escapes, and a highly publicised riot that included over 50 inmates in the Burnside Correctional Facility in Dartmouth. Speaker, Nova Scotians' confidence in our correction system is shaken, and they are looking for leadership from this government. So my question to the Premier is, what have you done to fully address the concerns and issues within the Correctional Service Unit in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the Honourable Member because, in fact, as he would know, in dealing with any of the pressures and issues that have come forward, we have been forthright and transparent in dealing with those, and that's why we had the Deloitte audit that was done. The implementations going forward, we've hired additional staff to work on that implementation. Many positive changes have been made and will continue to be made, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when this government boasted earlier this month that catch and release season had officially opened in Nova Scotia, most Nova Scotians assumed that it applied to sports fishing. Who would have thought that the Premier and Minister of Justice would have thought that it applied to Department of Corrections here in this province? So we have the embarrassment of mistaken releases, we have a riot at the Burnside facility, and today we find out they kept someone in custody 2 months longer than they'd been sentenced to. And what was their response? Next time this person comes to a correctional facility, they get 2 months free. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians deserve to have a correctional system that they can trust and they can believe in, and that's going to help keep our province safe and keep criminals behind bars where they belong. So my question again to the Premier, since you refused to accept the resignation that was offered by the Minister of Justice, what can you tell Nova Scotians now to restore confidence in our justice system in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to my honourable colleague, as he would know, and I'm sure he will be very supportive of the fact that indeed this government, in dealing with corrections, have worked with Canada on the stimulus package, have worked on strategic infrastructure partnerships, and I'm sure he's going to support the $18 million investment that will see 100 new persons being able to be incarcerated in Spring Hill in a joint partnership with Corrections Canada. That's the type of forging ahead with a plan, with the knowledge that we are working strategically. And Mr. Speaker, if they will allow the Minister of Finance to bring forward his budget, they'll see further improvements, and they can act on it by allowing this House to consider that budget.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians know that the announcement that was made by the Minister of, what are you these days? by the member from Cumberland South. Oh yeah, he's economic development, that's right. The Minister of Economic Development, that a new facility will be built in Spring Hill. We all know that 2 years is how long that will take, even being realistic in a best case scenario. But I'm sure that the good member from Cumberland North would probably have a few comments that he'd like to make about that new facility that's going to be constructed. Mr. Speaker, the problem exists today. Nova Scotians continue to be concerned about people being mistakenly released, a government that says they want to keep our streets safe, and yet we continue to see such mistakes happening. There is clearly a need for new leadership within the correctional system of this province, so I ask the Premier again, when will you finally show leadership, stand up, and assure Nova Scotians that the mistakes taking place in the Department of Justice are going to end, and they're going to end now?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, and as you would know, Nova Scotia has had significant investments that have been made to deal with the justice system. We have the best restorative justice program in North America. With our youth attendance centres that we have in Halifax, we're rolling out to Cape Breton. With the investments we've made in justice, that will ensure the integrity of our system. And when there have been challenges, Mr. Speaker, we've dealt with those head on, and therefore we brought forward a plan. And Mr. Speaker, if the member would allow the Minister of Finance to come forward and present that budget, he'll have the opportunity to vote for more investments in the justice system. But, Mr. Speaker, at this point, they don't seem willing to have that information brought before this House, so Nova Scotians can have the confidence of a criminal justice system that has the integrity of a government that continues to invest time and time again, but they won't.
The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, I have a question on behalf of the parents, children, school board members, and teachers in Queens. Your department chose to ignore their needs and ignore the advice of the South Shore Regional School Board. Your department wants to impose a solution on the community, closing a junior high and expanding an existing school, not building the new one everyone wanted. The board didn't recommend it, and the community doesn't want it. My question to the minister is, will she admit that her decision was based on politics pure and simple and not the community's priorities?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in my place, Mr. Speaker, and speak for as many minutes as you will allow, Mr. Speaker, about the phenomenal commitment of this government to build 8 new schools across this province, Mr. Speaker, to renovate 41 additional schools, Mr. Speaker, for a total of $307 million of investments to the students, to the youth, to the teachers, Mr. Speaker, to our communities, rural and urban, Mr. Speaker. That's proof positive of this government's, Mr. Speaker, that's proof positive of this government's commitment to communities in Nova Scotia from one end to the other, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Queens on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister is proposing expanding an elementary school to a P8 with over 800 students. The school board made the difficult decision to close Milton Centennial because they understood from the minister's department that a new freestanding middle school was coming. My question for the minister is, will she explain what criteria she used to decide to ignore the school board's priorities and the community's wishes?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
That's not near as much fun. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, to all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and to the members opposite, should they care to listen, $307 million is a phenomenal investment from one end of this province to the other, Mr. Speaker, to build 8 new schools, to renovate 41 new schools, Mr. Speaker, along with the over $425 million, Mr. Speaker, that we've already committed. Mr. Speaker, my goodness, I didn't teach math, but that's over $725 million of investments, Mr. Speaker. And the South Shore School Board is delighted, Mr. Speaker, with the $8 million that we have committed, Mr. Speaker, for whatever the community decides will work, that will match their community configuration, Mr. Speaker. And I am more than happy, Mr. Speaker, to continue to go on about the investments, but I know you'd rather I sit down, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Queens on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the previous minister Mr. Speaker, the previous Minister of Education approved removing South Queens Junior High from the renovation list and adding it to the future new construction list. But, Mr. Speaker, this minister has chosen to ignore construction priorities from the South Shore Board and the community. My question is, why does she know so much better than the people of Queens and our South Shore Board?
The Honourable the Minister of Education. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're extremely pleased and proud of the commitment of $307 million, Mr. Speaker, under the new proposals for communities from one end of Nova Scotia to the other. We know, in partnership with our school board representatives, Mr. Speaker, with our communities, Mr. Speaker, with with SAC committees, Mr. Speaker, we know, as we've been in communication with them just recently, Mr. Speaker, in Queens County, in all areas of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We know that they are pleased to propose recommendations, Mr. Speaker, to continue to work on options and alternatives that work for them, given the envelope that we've provided. And, Mr. Speaker, as always, we've indicated that should those options not prove to work for them, we'd be pleased to consider other options that they may bring forward, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Recently, the Minister announced no budget increases for community agencies doing critical work. This affects essential programs delivered by transition houses, women's centres, parent and family resource centres, and many others. Most haven't had any increase in 10 to 15 years. Their budgets have effectively been cut since 1995 by 10 to 24%. My question to the Minister, why are you forcing these agencies into a crisis when they are doing your department's work well and cost-effectively?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know last year a lot of these organizations did get modest increases. Mr. Speaker, as we looked at our budget, making sure that we'd have funds available to help those who so much need our help were available, that we had to hold the line, as we're holding the line right across this department when it comes to extra spending. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to have made the announcement that all of those budgets would be protected within this year's budget.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sector is reeling from the challenge of increased demands from the recession with fewer resources. More workers work in the voluntary sector than the retail industry in Nova Scotia. They're working with high-risk clients facing multiple issues. They've lost 30,000 volunteers annually. There's fierce competition for skilled staff, and yet they have to work for low salaries. So my question to the Minister, your government has become part of the problem, not part of the solution, by freezing grants. Where is the leadership needed to support the voluntary sector through this crisis?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, this government took leadership in providing Nova Scotia's first poverty reduction strategy, a reduction strategy that will bring $155 million to help the poor in this province. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity yesterday to sign off on a housing agreement with the federal minister that will bring well over $128 million for housing in this province. Mr. Speaker, this government has done more than that anyone would expect for us to do. Mr. Speaker, we have lots of things still on the books to do to ensure that there is less and less poverty in this province year over year over year.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Last December, you signed a collaboration agreement with the social service organizations in the voluntary sector. It affirmed a partnership based on dialogue, respect, and accountability. My question to the Premier, what is your signature worth on the collaboration agreement if your government's breaking the agreement already?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, I can only herald the poverty reduction strategy, one that will bring $88 million for skills and training development through our partners at Labour and Workforce Development, $2.4 million to help people in receipt of income assistance, $3.5 million in affordable childcare, $2.5 million or so for more families can access children's benefits.
Order,
Mr.
please.
Speaker.
The time allotted for oral questions put by members has elapsed. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before continuing with the business of the House, may I be permitted to do an introduction?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to draw the attention of the House to your gallery and an individual, as others were introduced here today, that will be, whenever the opportunity does arise and there is a provincial election, will be a candidate. And we have with us the candidate for the Progressive Conservatives for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, Ted Larson. I'd ask all members to welcome Ted to the House. Welcome, Ted.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government business for the day was being proposed to go to public bills for second reading, which would have been 236 Adjudicature Act. But I would ask, given the emergency debate and the nature of the topic that has been brought forward, that I would seek the consent of the House to forego the regular business, and we would adjourn our regular business for the day, and before doing that, I would seek approval first to do that, and then the business for tomorrow.
Is it agreed that we adjourn the business and go to the emergency debate? Agreed?
Yeah.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I do believe in the normal process of the emergency debate. We would adjourn the House and then go into the emergency debate. So what I would like to do, Mr. Speaker, is to move that we do now rise and meet again tomorrow from the hours of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., that following the daily routine will be the consideration of public bills for second reading, which would include bills 236, 240, 243, 245, 247, 248, 249, 50, 51, and 52. I so move. Busy day tomorrow.
Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very pleased to rise this evening, and I guess it's still this afternoon, and have the opportunity to speak on the challenges that Nova Scotia currently face with respect to the economic downturn, which is affecting the lives of so many of our constituents, so many of the people of this province. And Mr. Speaker, you only have to go to the newspaper on any particular day to read about the kind of difficulties that people are facing. We have seen, for example, Mr. Speaker, layoffs with Michelin. We have seen the closure of Eastern Protein and the loss of those jobs there. We have seen the layoffs at Pratt & Whitney. We have seen the layoffs at Fundy Gypsum. We've seen the closing of Kita Pharma, Cape Breton Castings, Magna, and Mr. Speaker, in Queens County, where I grew up, we have seen the temporary shutdown of Abitibi-Bowater and the difficulties, of course, the economic stress that causes for the people in those communities, in all of those communities. Abitibi-Bowater, just as an example, is a company which has a long and very rich history in Queens County, and if anything should happen to that plant, it wouldn't be just the employees there, but, Mr. Speaker, there are estimates that it would affect some 1,600 or 1,700 people, not just in Queens County, but in the adjoining counties as well. So you get some sense of the gravity of the economic dislocation that we teeter on the brink of. And I think it's been very clear that this has been although it often is related to forces that are beyond the control of governments, what is within our control is our ability to be able to respond to these kinds of crises. So that is why it is with some amazement the people of the province look around and try to figure out why it is the House of Assembly hasn't sat in some 5 months. They expect that in these extraordinary times, when their communities are facing economic crisis, when their neighbours are losing their jobs, when they are told that their pensions are in question, when they are seeing people lose their employment. I couldn't help but notice just the other day, Mr. Speaker, that Statistics Canada noted that the Nova Scotia employment numbers took another hit in January, with the province now having the 3rd highest rate in the country, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia's figures jumped to 8.8%, up from 8.2% in the previous month. That gives you some idea of what is happening out there across the province. And yet, Mr. Speaker, here we are in the legislature with a government which is the last one in the country to provide any kind of economic update so that people can be aware of what the actual economic situation is. They're the last one in the country to come up with a stimulus program. And Mr. Speaker, I attended the announcement of the stimulus program, which amounted to really not much of anything except a sketch of what the Premier had in mind. In fact, the only real thing we knew about the so-called stimulus package was that they were going to add $1.4 billion to the provincial debt. And we are in a province where, despite the fact that we are now at the end of April, the House has still not had the opportunity to see a budget from the government at a time of this great economic stress. And Mr. Speaker, I know, and we've watched while the government has postured around the question of their economic plan, their budget plan, and they seek, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, to use the budget and the Provincial Finance Act to try and shift the blame for their own decision-making onto the benches of the opposition parties. And they know, and we know, that this is absolutely transparent to the people of the province. And I hear it absolutely everywhere I go. They recognize what the reality, what the truth is, Mr. Speaker. And the truth is that this is a government that ran a budget deficit in the previous budget year. And now what they want to do is change the law. They want to change the law so that they can take money that was put on the debt in 2005 and pretend, they want all of us here in the House of Assembly, want all of us to make believe, along with them, that that is somehow revenue in last year, and that therefore the budget was balanced. Well, Mr. Speaker, nobody's buying it. Nobody's buying it. What they expect from their government, especially at times like this, is an honest portrayal of where the province stands. And they expect to see a budget that portrays an honest vision for the province. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we have seen absolutely none of that. Instead, the government is engaged in a kind of shell game designed to try and move figures around on the balance sheet in order to make itself look good, when they know that what is going to happen is that they are going to run up yet further debt on behalf of the province. Mr. Speaker, the government has been sitting on their hands while 9 other provinces proceeded with timely budgets. For all Nova Scotians do know about the government is that they intend to add an additional $1.4 billion to the province's current debt. Now, Mr. Speaker, the current debt of the province is over $12 billion. We pay every year some $900 million just in interest to service that debt. And it's no secret that debt was amassed as a result of the free spending ways of the Conservative government through the 1980s primarily. Other governments were also responsible for adding to that debt, but it put us in this position. It put us in this position so that now, each and every year, the amount of money that we spend on interest is 2.5 times the amount of money that's spent on infrastructure in the province. It's 2.5 times what the Department of Transportation's budget is. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the one way that governments are able to tie the hands of future governments. You can't do it at law, but you can do it by running the province so far in debt that there is no flexibility in future governments to be able to respond to crises like this one. I just want you to think about $1.4 billion in additional debt and what that actually means to people. If you take that new Tory debt and you divide it by our population, you will discover that the Conservative plan means that that a family of 4 in this province will be on the hook for an additional $6,000 in debt. And sooner or later, Mr. Speaker, they talk over there as if the debt burden, the debt that they're going to incur is somehow free. But sooner or later, the people of the province are going to have to repay it. And that is going to be passed along to the next generation, Mr. Speaker, through the irresponsible exercise of the budgets of this government. You know, Mr. Speaker, I've been in the House for 11 years. Been in the House for 11 years. And here's the irony, because I believe that the greatest single moment of John Ham's term as Premier was the day that he received $830 million from the Atlantic Accord. And with our support, he used that money to pay down the provincial debt. And now, the Premier, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is going to single-handedly wipe out that achievement. Single-handedly wipe out the achievement. And the sad thing about that, Mr. Speaker, is that everybody in this room understands who ultimately pays for that debt. Everyone understands that the price of excessive debt is hospital bed closures, it's nurses having their wages rolled back, it's road improvements canceled, it's schools falling into disrepair. That's what the legacy of the previous Tory debt has been. And now, Mr. Speaker, their road to prosperity is through further debt. Mr. Speaker, you know, if debt were the road to prosperity, there would be statues to John Buchanan all over this province, Mr. Speaker. But there isn't, because debt is not the road to prosperity. Debt is the means that the things that you want to be able to do for your citizens you are not able to do, because the budget flexibility that you require in order to invest in new hospitals, invest in new schools, in new programming, and, Mr. Speaker, for that matter, the money that you would like to invest in tax relief is done away with. So when they decide that their approach to the economy is to increase the debt of the province, Mr. Speaker, they are doing all of us, every citizen, a great disservice. Mr. Speaker, we've tried to lay out for the government some of the ideas that we have about how you go about approaching successfully strengthening the economic infrastructure. That's why we've been trying to convince the government that a manufacturing and processing tax credit that will reward companies for investing in new technology, investing in new productivity measures is the way to stimulate investment in this province. Mr. Speaker, we've proposed a 10% tax credit. We know it's modest, but we want to make sure that we are living within the means of the province. And we want to make sure that it is enough to be able to incent that kind of investment, because we hear from manufacturers and from processors who say now is actually the time to be investing in new technology. Now is the time to make yourself ready so that you can take advantage of that as the economy starts to pick up. So we need to invest, incent investment in new industry, but we also have to invest in people, Mr. Speaker. We need to make sure that the unique competitive advantage of this province is actually its people. We need to invest in new training, in new education. We have to make sure that our community colleges and our universities are accessible to the young people of this province. We need to make sure that those workers who are currently in the workforce but underemployed are able to come back and get the reskilling and the retraining that they need so that they can be a bigger and more productive part of our economy, Mr. Speaker. And that's what the members on this side of the House that is what we have been trying to get through to the government. Mr. Speaker, a real plan for this province takes three things. It takes vision, it takes commitment, and it takes courage. And that's what the people, that's what the members on this side of the House is all about, Mr. Speaker. That's what we are all about. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, they on that side are about trying to manipulate the books to prevent people from getting an honest picture of the province's finance, Mr. Speaker. They don't like the truth, Mr. Speaker. They don't want the truth, Mr. Speaker. And quite frankly, they can't handle the truth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to join this debate tonight. Mr. Speaker, it was October 31st, 2008 when we had this debate. Began to talk about the economy of this province, encourage this government to deal with the economic crisis that was before us as a province and as a country, and really, Mr. Speaker, globally. The challenges that were there, we reached across this floor and asked this government to be a partner, to try to help mitigate the damage that would take place from one end of this province to the other, and really in our economy nationally. And as the Leader of the Opposition listed down through the number of layoffs that has taken place since that time, as you know, 4,400 Nova Scotians lost their jobs in the months November alone. 1% of our workforce, Mr. Speaker, in the month of November alone, when government was telling Nova Scotians we were months away from the economic challenge and downturn. We've been the last government to have their hosts recalled. We've been the last government to lay out a constructive, positive solution for how we're going to make sure that our economy continues to move forward and how we are going to be able to position ourselves to take advantage of the opportunities that will exist at the end of this downturn. Mr. Speaker, since 2003 till present day, we had the worst performing economy in the country collectively. We've had the worst performing economy in the country. Mr. Speaker, I want you to think about that for a moment. In 2003, Canada was either at the top or second in our G8 countries in economic performance. Our country was booming. And Nova Scotia had the worst performing economy in our country. Nova Scotia was dead last in the best economic times for our country. That should be an indication, Mr. Speaker, that the way we've been attacking this problem hasn't been working not only in the good times, but it certainly won't work in these difficult times. The answer is simply not writing a check. The answer is simply not adding $1.4 billion to our debt and then asking our children to make some decisions we were unwilling to make. Mr. Speaker, asking our children to forgo their future to pay for our mistakes. There was a generation of politicians who, quite frankly, robbed this generation of politicians, the ability to make some decisions. There's a generation of politicians that sat in this House and just wrote checks for everything. Someone arrived here with a problem, we wrote a check. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, our children are left with a $12 billion debt, crumbling infrastructure, roads that are decaying from one end of this province to the other, schools that, as the Minister of Education had talked about today, are in tough shape, hospitals that are closing. So, Mr. Speaker, from that point, where do we go and how do we go forward? We have said on this side of the House that it's time for, as a province, that we need to do business differently. We need to look at how do we engage the men and women who are creating the jobs from one end of this province to the other. How do we engage them to be our partner? How do we say to them, we need your help to rebuild this economy? You are the people who stood with us in the most difficult times and in the best of times, and you are the people that are still here, creating the jobs from one end of Nova Scotia to the other. I believe, our caucus believes, we need to partner with them. We need to cut the small business tax from 5% to 1%, Mr. Speaker. We need to engage the men and women who are creating the jobs. We need to reach out to them and say, here, we want to be your partner. We're going to give you the tools to create the jobs in Ecumsecum, to create the jobs in Bridgetown and Sydney and in downtown Halifax. You're the people who have been doing it. We're not going to engage and we're not going to write checks for people to fly in, spend government money when it's over, leave. We want to be your partner. You are the people who have an investment in your community beyond just your business, in our school boards, in our hospital boards, in our hockey programs, our soccer programs. You've committed to our youth. We now want to be your partner to commit to grow this economy. 50% of Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, work for small business. 50% of Nova Scotia jobs are in small business. Why then wouldn't the government of today want to partner with them? Join us, reducing that small business tax and telling them, here's the tools for you to create those stable and secure jobs as we go forward. Not only will it provide stimulus in every community across this province, not only will it provide stimulus to every business, every community, and every family today, but it would set our province up to be competitive at the end of this economic downturn. It's not picking winners and losers. It's not picking one sector over another. It's engaging the small business community. And at the end of this downturn, it would allow them to be competitive, to take advantage of the opportunities that exist at the end of every downturn. Whenever there's been a downturn, Mr. Speaker, not only in our economy, but in the global economy, there's always been an upswing. And the businesses and the governments and the countries that have prepared themselves for the upswing are the ones that thrive at the end of the day. They're not the ones that just dump another $1.4 billion on their debt without a plan. One of the challenges for small business, Mr. Speaker, is access to capital. Extremely difficult not only in these economic tough times, but it's difficult sometimes in the best of times. It's why we believe we need to be partners in providing a microcredit lending system with NSBI, allowing loans up to $25,000, not only to deal with the tough challenges today, but it would allow the businesses to reshape themselves for the opportunities that will exist going forward. It would allow them to invest in their employees. It would allow them to ensure the survival of their business, but more importantly, it would allow them to grow our economy in the province of Nova Scotia. I believe our success and our ability to grow jobs in this province will be directly related to the partnership we create with the small business. The people who have invested in us for generations have stayed here and shown faith in our economy and in our province, Mr. Speaker. But as part of that, as we go forward, we're not opposed to providing some stimulus and put it into the economy of this province. But it has to be, Mr. Speaker, with the eye of saying What does that project do for us at the end of this downturn? Not only will it provide jobs today, not only will it allow us to build a piece of infrastructure, but what will it do in 5 years, in 20 years? What will it do for our economy? Mr. Speaker, I know that the university presidents have visited every caucus, spoken to every member of this House, and talked about a plan, and they talked about the infrastructure deficit at our universities. There's over a $500 million infrastructure deficit, Mr. Speaker. And they know, and they willingly admit, you can't solve that problem overnight. But what they said and what they did as a group, they came together, and they put together a plan. And they put together a plan that was logical, it was thoughtful, and you could see at the end of it what the results were going to be. We engaged them in that conversation. We said to the university presidents, are you looking for all of this money from the province of Nova Scotia? It's around $100 million, Mr. Speaker. They said no. We do believe, though, the province should have some investment in that. The federal government would participate in that, Mr. Speaker. The private sector would participate in that. The endowment funds at universities would participate in that. So instead of saying to our children, we're going to dump another $100 million of debt on top of you, we should be reaching out and finding those partners and saying for that small investment, we would provide infrastructure, jobs in every region of this province, across sectors, plumbers, electricians, lawyers, architects, and the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. But what it would do is it would provide us with a piece of infrastructure that would allow us in 5 years to continue to educate our children for the jobs of today and the ones of tomorrow. It wouldn't just be spending money for the sake of spending it without a plan. Mr. Speaker, paving in this House has been talked about an awful lot, and I represent a rural riding, and let me tell you, my riding could use as much paving as anyone's. But we need to make sure that as we go through and spend those precious dollars that we have as a province, regardless of who is sitting on that side of the House, as we go forward to make those decisions, we need to be looking through the paving of this province through an economic lens. What are the corridors like that we move our goods and services over, that our people come to and from? Mr. Speaker, when people come to our province, go to enjoy the Cabot Trail, to enjoy the South Shore, the Valley, Mr. Speaker, they should be leaving our province with the thought of what the hospitality of our citizens, the beauty of our countryside, and not remembering the shape of the roads. And when you ask for a plan, on what's going to happen in paving projects in the next number of months and years, there is no plan. It's helter-skelter, Mr. Speaker. And I'll repeat, I'm from a rural riding, and I don't expect this government or any government to be able to deal with the highway infrastructure challenge that's in front of us. But we certainly can't deal with it if we not put a plan in place that would systematically look at our highway infrastructure from an economic point of view to kind of drive our economy, to allow us to move our goods and services, to allow our people to move to and from, so that we can have the tax revenue to be able to invest in the things that we believe in. Mr. Speaker, the other real challenge for business today is the uncertainty that this province has been left in because the government was unwilling to respond in a timely way. There's no reason why we as a province should not be sitting in this House of Assembly in February and introducing a budget in February and debating it in February. So by the end of one fiscal year and the beginning of another, Nova Scotia's public institutions that we rely on, plus the business community, have a sense of where we're going as a province. If we're going to try to create a partnership, to build our province, to move forward, then we have to be open. We have to move away from making budgets fit our timetable. It has to fit the timetable of the fiscal year. Our school boards, our hospital boards, our municipalities, all of the public institutions that we rely on should be treated with the respect they deserve and understand what their budgets are by April 1. Whether they like it or not at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, whether we can argue about the amounts, we always will argue about the amounts. But they should know that, that they have a provincial government that is a partner with them and allow them to move forward. And that is no different, Mr. Speaker, for the business community. They need to understand with some certainty that their government understands the challenges they're in and is going to respond in a timely fashion. Mr. Speaker, we've debated this issue for a long time outside of this House. Every other government, every other province responded in a timely manner. And we are the only province still sitting here, Mr. Speaker, in this uncertainty. Not only are we in economic uncertainty, we are in political uncertainty. It's a dangerous recipe, Mr. Speaker, for the people of this province. It's time that this House dealt with the issue one way or another. Either this government brings forward legislation that we can support, that is not asking us to change the law to go retroactively, that is not allowing us to cook the books, to make sure that it fits their fiscal needs, or let's go to the polls and let the people of Nova Scotia decide who should sit here and who shouldn't. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise this evening and to say a few words about the subject that is on everyone's mind in Nova Scotia, indeed on everyone's mind in our country and indeed worldwide. And that's of the economy, Mr. Speaker, and the global economic slowdown that we have seen during the past year. Now, Mr. Speaker, while there's definitely cause for concern because we do live in a global economy, Nova Scotia has fared much better than many other parts of the country and much better than many other parts of the world, Mr. Speaker, as a result of a lot of work done by our government and the good people of our province. Mr. Speaker, this government's efforts to get the province's finances on solid footing and to grow the economy are insulating the province from some of those challenges, Mr. Speaker. For example, last year, Nova Scotia's GDP growth was well above the national average. Mr. Speaker, the latest statistics Canadian labour force survey shows that the employment was at a record high in March, and only Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan posted positive year-over-year employment gains, Mr. Speaker. We're creating good jobs in this province. There were 4 provinces, I believe, that had an increase in GDP last year. We were among those 4, Mr. Speaker. There are positive things happening here. Now, I look back in the last couple of months, and I look back at one of those announcements being Flagstone, Mr. Speaker. They announced the creation of 80 new jobs that are paying in the neighbourhood here in Halifax around $100,000 per job, Mr. Speaker. That's an example of what we're doing. I take a look at Lockheed Martin and the plans that they have to see additional jobs there as well, Mr. Speaker. Just this past week, I joined the Minister of Economic and Rural Development in the Amherst area with a small business that started off with 2 gentlemen called Berdines, Mr. Speaker. They are now at 13. We announced a payroll rebate. They're increasing to 35 jobs, Mr. Speaker, out in rural Nova Scotia. And we've seen roughly 15,000 jobs created in the past few years in that regard, Mr. Speaker. And we were able to do that, Speaker, because we have a variety of choices and programs that we offer. Choices of programs such as the payroll rebate through NSBI, which is working. It's the very reason why we increased the IEF spending, Mr. Speaker, to be able to react quickly to businesses that require help, whether it's through a loan guarantee, Mr. Speaker, or a loan which has to be repaid with interest, Mr. Speaker. And when we look down the water at Nova Scotia Crystal, we have a good example of a Nova Scotia company
that was able to maintain, Mr. Speaker, and continue to exist here in our province. It's an icon for our province, and without the support of the government, they have said it, Mr. Speaker, they wouldn't have been able to do it. That's what this government is doing and focused on. And the list can go on, Mr. Speaker. I can speak about the credit union loan program, which provides upwards to $150,000. The Leader of the Liberal Party mentioned small business. There is a program there. The Business Retention and Expansion Program, Mr. Speaker. There are many, many programs, and we work individually with business to deal with the challenges. But what I'm hearing from the opposition during the past few weeks, and what I'm hearing from the opposition today, Mr. Speaker, is that they don't support, thank you, they don't support a capital stimulus package, because we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that revenues are indeed falling, and, Mr. Speaker, that's being experienced by every other province. One of the questions that continues to come up is the timing of the budget. Well, in fact, last year and this very day, 1 year ago, we introduced last year's budget, Mr. Speaker. A year ago today, I've heard the Liberal Party speak about budgets, Mr. Speaker. In 1998 and 1999, they delivered their budget in June, Mr. Speaker. In June. Speaker, which I know you're very familiar with, and you recall that month.
With a $600 million deficit.
Right. And, Mr. Speaker, we have taken the time, and our staff in our various departments have put a tremendous amount of energy into going through each and every budget item line by line, because we recognize the challenge, and they recognize the challenges. Almost every other province in the country will have a deficit. This province, Mr. Speaker, once again, will have a balanced budget for the people of our province. Well, it takes time to make sure you do the proper planning. It takes time to do the proper work, and it takes time to put forward a capital stimulus plan which leverages federal opportunity. Today, we announced $422 million, which will impact not only the short term, Mr. Speaker, and when I talk about our schools and our universities, I talk about we're putting money into infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, but indeed we're putting money into the foundations of our education system and the foundations of our economy for the future. And if we don't take the opportunity to leverage those dollars, Mr. Speaker, those dollars will be lost. They will go to another province, because the federal government has been very clear, if we don't spend the money in the next 24 months, we will lose it. The Road Builders Association have come out because they recognize the short construction season, Mr. Speaker. The university presidents have come out because they recognize the challenges that they have to deal with. Mr. Speaker, the Chambers of Commerce, everyone recognizes, except the leaders of the opposition. And I have heard the leader of the NDP, Mr. Speaker, saying, well, don't add to the debt, Mr. Speaker, balance the book, do everything, Mr. Speaker, be all things to all people. Meanwhile, they're out making promises, over $2 billion worth of promises. There's 70 promises. Not one of them, Mr. Speaker, that will stimulate the economy.
That's a risky party, that NDP.
We have a responsibility as a government. We have a responsibility as MLAs to ensure that the people of our province get as much benefit and our businesses are able to deal with what is a significant challenge. Our Economic Advisory Council, which is made up of some of the brightest minds in business in Nova Scotia, are saying we need to get this capital stimulus plan through, or else it will hurt the economy of our province. And I believe them, Mr. Speaker, because they are the ones that have trucks out in the highways. They are the ones that are doing the day-to-day business, Mr. Speaker, and I respect what they are saying, Mr. Speaker. I respect what they are saying. Mr. Speaker, we can't afford, as my good colleague from Cape Breton North just said, what the NDP are proposing. The only way to afford what the NDP and the Liberals are suggesting, Mr. Speaker, is to raise taxes significantly. That is the only way to afford what they are saying. They're saying do not have a stimulus package, raise taxes. That's what they're saying. There's no other way, Mr. Speaker, when revenues are down. And I know you know that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they are risky, extremely risky. And they're willing to roll the dice for political reasons, not for what is right for Nova Scotia. Speaker, I want to make sure that yes, my son and other young people in this province have an opportunity going forward in the future. That's why we have balanced the books. I remember back in 99, 2000, 2001, and 2002, and my colleagues, many of whom were there then, remember, when we were standing up and making the tough decisions to balance the books of the province, and the NDP were voting against those decisions, Mr. Speaker. I remember when that was the case. It's not that long ago. And some of those decisions were not easy, but they were the right decisions, Mr. Speaker, and that's why the cost of borrowing this province has gone down significantly on our debt. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we have been able to invest in our schools and our highways and grow the economy of our province. Mr. Speaker, we are bucking the trend when it comes to what is happening across the country. People are taking a look at Nova Scotia because they recognize we have done things right. Do we have challenges? Yes, we do. And we need to recognize those challenges. We can't hide from them, Mr. Speaker, and that's what the leader of the NDP is saying. Hide, pretend they're not there. Pretend they are there, Mr. Speaker. And this capital plan recognizes that, it deals with that, and while we have a plan, they have no plan. Speaker, they have no plan. What will they do? They will have to raise your taxes, Mr. Speaker. They will raise the taxes of every Nova Scotian, because that's the only way to afford the risky promises of the NDP. They don't like hearing that, Speaker, but that's the truth, and they know it. They know it, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, by denying this budget the opportunity to proceed and go through, Mr. Speaker, by denying that opportunity, they are denying Nova Scotians. They are denying Nova Scotians, 20,000 Nova Scotians, the opportunity to work, Mr. Speaker, in the short term, and denying Nova Scotians the opportunity to have the infrastructure they need for the long-term future of this province, Mr. Speaker. Now, I have people, Mr. Speaker, coming home from out west that are looking for work. They're looking for work now, Mr. Speaker. I have people who would have been going, Mr. Speaker, and they are home. Now, the NDP leader may think that's not a serious situation. I can tell you in my riding, it's a serious situation. And, Mr. Speaker, those people want these jobs to happen. Those people are coming to me and saying, you got to find a way to get that budget through, Mr. Speaker, because Mr. Speaker, because that's important for me and my family. And I respect them, Mr. Speaker, and I respect the fact that those jobs are not only needed for them, but they are needed for their children, and they are needed for the people of this province. And I do talk to them about the risky schemes being put forward by the leader of the NDP. I do talk to them about the fact that they will have to raise their taxes, Mr. Speaker. And while they're looking for a job, the NDP, Mr. Speaker, and the Liberals would rather be out on a campaign trail. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am more concerned about the main streets of our small communities and our cities, Mr. Speaker. I am more concerned about these individuals than I am about elections, Mr. Speaker. I am more concerned about the municipalities, Mr. Speaker, we invested in this morning, and we announced money in Richmond County, Mr. Speaker, for wastewater management, Mr. Speaker. I am more concerned about seeing that project go forward than Mr. Speaker, a ballot box. I am more concerned about the people in Queens County and making sure, Mr. Speaker, that the 100 Series Highway, the 103, gets the needed infrastructure and investment it needs. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Antigonish and St. FX University see the investment they need. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, that we take advantage of the opportunity that the Atlantic Gateway provides for Nova Scotia and the future of our province. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, about the good people of Cumberland County and the new correctional facility, which it will provide for them. I am more concerned, Mr. Speaker, about the people in Sydney who are depending, Mr. Speaker, on these jobs, Mr. Speaker. I am more concerned with them than I am about the opposition, Mr. Speaker, and their want for an election.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place and speak in this emergency debate. Mr. Speaker, I've been in this legislature for 11 years now. I'm privileged to represent a constituency where we still have a manufacturing base. You know, I like to say that we make ships and beer in my constituency. And although we've been abandoned pretty much by our federal government with respect to a national shipbuilding policy, we still have a very fine shipyard, and we still have a very good skilled labor force in that constituency. Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very serious matter. It's a difficult time for many families and many communities throughout our province. Mr. Speaker, we are currently experiencing a global recession, the worst downturn in our economy since the Great Depression. And Mr. Speaker, the difficulties that we see, particularly as the leader of the official opposition indicated when he spoke earlier in this debate, is primarily due to the relationship that we have as a trading partner with the United States. And the litany of problems in the American economy is well known to us all: the bank failures, the slump in the housing market, the automobile industry crisis, and so on. Mr. Speaker, not so long ago, just in the last few weeks, I had the privilege of joining a parliamentary exchange to China. And I'll tell you, it was really quite an eye-opener to go to this country. And this is a country that has experienced a loss of 30 million jobs in this recession. 30 million jobs have been lost. 30 million workers in China have been sent home from the free trade zones. But Mr. Speaker, what was really interesting was the Chinese government had managed to have a budget and a stimulus package and a plan, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the plan was underway. And Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member has the floor. Yes.
And Mr. Speaker, the government of China have been very much engaged in the international conversation. Well, Mr. Speaker, the government House leader talks about whether or not there's democracy in China, and I just want to let the honourable House leader know that I found some similarities between our province and our government in this province and the Chinese government, in that they too only have their House sit approximately 8 or 12 days a year. And they think, and Mr. Speaker, they think that that is okay. And I had to say, I couldn't tell them that we sat a heck of a lot longer in our democratic system. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, really, I'd like to focus about the concerns of many families and communities here in Nova Scotia. The Premier spoke about the growth in GDP in Nova Scotia, and I have to say, when I saw this in the paper, I felt good about that. And I think we all need to retain some elements of a positive outlook. We have a mixed economy in this province, a good mix of public and private sector, of manufacturing, of resource-based industries, and of services. And this actually gives our economy some resilience, I guess you would say. But Mr. Speaker, the rosy picture that the Premier points to is not the picture throughout this province. I'm very fortunate to represent a constituency here in our capital. But let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier should be well aware of this, let me tell you what the unemployment rate is on the beautiful island of Cape Breton right now. 17.2% unemployment, up from 15% unemployment. Mr. Speaker, that's not a rosy picture. And that isn't the only region of this province that has difficulty. Let me look at northern Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, the northern region. The northern region has gone from 9.7% unemployment last year to 12.2%, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when we look at the southern region of this province, the southern region has gone from 9.9% unemployment to 13.5% unemployment, Mr. Speaker. So, in fact, the parts of this province that the majority of members over there are representing doesn't seem to be doing so well, Mr. Speaker. And this is a very great concern, and that's something that we need to be debating and talking about in this legislature. Now, Mr. Speaker, I hear the members from the other side screaming about passing the budget. Well, Mr. Speaker, they haven't even set a date to bring a budget forward. Show us the budget. Bring that budget forward. Mr. Speaker, there are many measures that we need to be looking at and considering. One of the things that my leader and this party has been advocating for is a return to a manufacturing and a processing tax credit and a rebate program, Mr. Speaker. And this, I think, Mr. Speaker, once was available to businesses and companies in the province of Nova Scotia, and they could invest in new capital equipment, and they could apply for a tax credit against income or future income and receive a rebate. And this would encourage, Mr. Speaker, advances in technology and the kind of innovation to keep our manufacturing base healthy and competitive. And, Mr. Speaker, in the past probably year and a half, before it was apparent, in fact, that we were entering into the kind of global recession, the kinds of signs were there. We saw Moyers leave. We saw Trenton Works leave. We saw a number of manufacturing plants around the province lay off and close down. And, Mr. Speaker, we know about the difficulties that the pulp and paper industry have experienced throughout the province. And when you look at New Leaf in the Strait of Canso, and the fact that they have, in fact, invested in new technology, as I understand, the mill that they have now, New Page, excuse me, not New Leaf, New Page, they, in fact, have invested in technology that gives them a competitive advantage in that they are the only plant now with a particular kind of mill that can make a particular kind of paper. This really is the kind of thing that we need to be looking at, and it is, in fact, something that the return of a manufacturing and processing tax credit and rebate program would be very helpful around. Mr. Speaker, I had a fair number of workers who worked at Moyers who live in my community. And I remember when the announcement came around that plant, and I know my colleague here from Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, spent a fair amount of time because that particular manufacturer was in her riding. I thought, Mr. Speaker, what are we going to do if we lose all of our manufacturing base? And when you go to a country like China, you start to see how that, in fact, is a real possibility. The threat of industries leaving North America and locating in the free trade economic development zones, essentially, that the Chinese government have set up for people. When I was in China, I was in a steel plant. Maybe it was the steel plant that the former Tory government sold the mill from Sydney Steel to, I don't know, but they had the 12,000 workers, and it was an enormous plant. It had the capacity to serve a very significant part of the world market in terms of steel. This is what we're up against, Mr. Speaker, in many respects when we look at our manufacturing sector. And so we really need very much to look at the ways that we can use our resources to support industries that not only fit in our economy, but have been really a fundamental backbone to many communities in this province. The jobs that we have in manufacturing tend to be good jobs, well-paid, good benefits, and the kind of security that people in families and communities really rely on. And so this tax credit, Mr. Speaker, is, I think, something that this government should significantly or seriously look at. Mr. Speaker, in addition to looking at manufacturing, of course, we need to look at recessionary times as the time when people aren't in the labor force and they can be retrained. Their skills can be upgraded and their educational attainment can be improved so that when the economy improves, you're ready to hit the ground running. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have daily in our constituency offices contact from people who are having real difficulty getting employment insurance, number one, and getting into the kinds of training and retraining programs that they really would need for the recovery, for when there is a recovery. And Mr. Speaker, I remember in 1995 when the federal Liberal government of Paul Martin gutted the employment insurance program. There are many, many, many studies and reports that have been done by a wide range of think tanks about the impact of those changes. And the prediction was that if we ever faced a serious recession, we would find ourselves with a social safety net for working people that would be in tatters. And in fact, that's exactly what we have. We have an EI system that approximately 43% of the workforce can actually get access to. And the rest of the labor force is ineligible for EI. We have a system that people apply to and they wait 4 to 6 weeks to get any benefits. I was at a food bank in my constituency, Parker Street, with Mr. Mel Boutelier yesterday before the House opened. And I can tell you they are seeing people at the food bank who have applied for employment insurance, who cannot pay their rent, pay their mortgages, give their children the kinds of fees they need for the programs they're involved in the school system, and they're waiting for a program that they've been paying into and they should be eligible for, and they should be eligible for it within a much shorter period of time than currently is the case. And it's disgraceful that we have allowed our federal government to erode that program to the extent that we have.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's with mixed feelings that I have the opportunity to rise and speak for a few minutes on this emergency debate that we have here this evening. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been said about the situation we find ourselves here in Nova Scotia, and in many ways it's typical of what's being faced by other Canadian provinces. What was mentioned earlier in question period that our leader raised to the Premier, I think is the question all Nova Scotians are asking. We know that Nova Scotia is the last province to bring in a stimulus package. We know Nova Scotia is the last Canadian province to recall its legislature to deal with the economy and bring forward a budget. We know Nova Scotia is the last province to bring a budget forward. In fact, they have yet to bring a budget, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't think the Minister of Finance actually gave us a date as to when he's going to be bringing in his budget. So the question that our leader, well, now, if he wants to bring it in on Monday, Speaker, under the British parliamentary system, as you well know, the government determines what the order of business is going to be. It is not the opposition, because I can assure you, if it was the opposition, this House would work quite a bit differently than it's been working in the last 10 years under a Tory government. But, Mr. Speaker, the question that our leader was asking, which I think is a legitimate question, and maybe the Minister of Finance wants to stand on his feet and answer it, was, what's taken so long? What has taken Nova Scotia so long to be able to bring a stimulus package together and to present a budget and recall the legislature? I think it's a very legitimate question. And if that question was answered, Mr. Speaker, I and others may reflect and say, well, okay, is that legitimate? It's a legitimate excuse that it took this long. Can they tell us here is what they, that's, oh.
Order, please. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Finance.
If he would like an answer, I think one of the things he was talking about are the fact that we'd be quite happy to present a budget Monday, and all the two opposition parties just got a consent with being tabled. Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to table it on Monday. But the other thing is, Mr. Speaker, the other two parties are talking about balanced budgets. And Mr. Speaker, we're presenting balanced budgets, but all of the examples that they cited, except two, in the rest of the country, didn't balance their budgets, Mr. Speaker. So here they are saying they're really talking, you know, what do we say, sucking and blowing at the same time. Mr. Speaker, either they want balanced budgets, which we're prepared to present, or they are standing up there, singing the praises of governments that weren't able to balance their budget. Mr. Speaker, what is it?
Thank you for your... Chair recognizes the honourable member for Richmond.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that we've heard a lot of talk about projects being shovel-ready. What we just heard from the Minister of Finance was a lot of shoveling, but I can assure you what he was shoveling wouldn't make for very good foundations for school or for highways here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the British parliamentary system does not require the opposition to give consent for the government to bring in a budget. The Minister of Finance knows that. It does not at all. The Minister of Finance can bring in a budget when he wants to bring in a budget, following the rules that are established of 2 days' notice. He's known this. He's been in this House as long as I've been in, since 1998. He knows how it works. But, Mr. Speaker, I was going to say this later, but let me say it now, because I feel bad for the Minister of Finance. I really do. The man announced that he was leaving politics after, I think, a successful career. And he made his, I think, to the best of his abilities, his impact on Nova Scotia and on behalf of his constituents. And I find it unfortunate that the Premier put him in the situation that he's been put in. Because unfortunately, he has to stand in this House and defend a budget that he's not going to go to the polls and face Nova Scotians and say, I'm prepared to put my name on the ballot because I believe this is the best budget. And that's a decision he had made beforehand. So I'm not criticizing him that he doesn't want to run now, because he announced it before. And it's very unfortunate, because at the end of the day, it's the Minister of Finance who brings forward the fiscal plan that then goes to Nova Scotians with the Premier and say, this is why I think this is the best plan for Nova Scotians. This minister is not going to do that. And again, it's not a criticism. He already said he wouldn't do that. So I blame the Premier for that. The Premier put in a minister who said he's not running again to try to sell a fiscal plan that he will not have his name on the ballot saying, here's why I think this is the best fiscal plan. So that's the unfortunate situation the Minister of Finance finds himself in. But once again, what the Minister of Finance failed to answer, and the Premier failed to answer, is what's taken so long? And while the Minister of Finance might get up and criticize the budgets of the other provinces, no one here has been praising those budgets. What we've been praising is the fact they've allowed the residents in their provinces to see the budget, to at least know what the stimulus plan was going to be. We can listen to the Minister of Finance all day tell us that the budget's going to be balanced. The question is, again, what's taken so long, and how are we to know as legislators that that's the case when we haven't seen it? So it's a very simple question, and why the Premier won't answer it, I don't know. And Mr. Speaker, if the Premier could stand in this House and say to Nova Scotians, I have been working 7 days a week to try to address the economic situation in Nova Scotia, and I've been working as hard as I can, and all of my ministers 7 days a week. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, we know that the Premier sends out every week his schedule. We all know that that's not the case. So again, we ask the question, what has taken so long? And if, as I mentioned before, if there's a legitimate answer, let's hear it. Why is it that every other Canadian province other than Nova Scotia is ahead of the game? Why is it every other government has brought forward a stimulus package and we haven't? Well, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing as elected officials, and I hear one of them say we're blocking it. Blocking it? You know, Mr. Speaker, the budget from the federal government, which this government every year has said, we have to wait till we get the numbers from the federal government before we can bring in our budget. Every year. This year, the problem was the federal government pulled a fast one on them. They brought the budget in January. So we wait. February, March, April, and now we'll be into May. 4 months after the federal numbers are out, we're still waiting for a budget. Mr. Speaker, there's absolutely no excuse for that. And as I mentioned before, it's one thing for the government to say, oh, well, look, he's a member of the opposition, so he's just criticizing us, and the NDP are just criticizing us because they're in the opposition. My thoughts on what's happening here today, Mr. Speaker, I don't think I could summarize them any better than what was summarized by a respected columnist here in Nova Scotia in the article that was written today by Marilla Stevenson in the Chronicle Herald. She's not a member of the opposition. She's not a member of the NDP or of the Liberal Party, as far as we're aware. But what did she write? The headline, Premier has only himself to blame. Interesting. So she starts off with saying, quote, all of a sudden, Premier Rodney MacDonald is worried about delays that may hurt the provincial economy. What gall? Not my words. That's the words exactly from the column. Let me read a little bit further. Quote, it was the Premier's choice to delay the spring sitting of the legislature to thereby delay the introduction of the annual budget and to delay providing an update to Nova Scotians on the state of the province's books. End quote. Nothing incorrect in that statement. And she goes on and says, quote, I think the Premier, she quotes the Premier where he says, I don't believe Nova Scotians want an election. We don't want an election. We believe that moving forward in that direction, we're going to hurt the economy, end quote. To which she responds with, quote, hurt the economy? If anything is hurting the economy, besides the stinging impact of job losses and shrinking revenues, it is the delay in getting government stimulus spending into Nova Scotia communities, end quote. Not my words, this is her words. I think that's a reflection of the thoughts of most Nova Scotians. So she goes on, again, quote, now after choosing to delay the opening of the legislature for the spring sitting, in an economic environment that surely called for an earlier than usual session of the House of Assembly, the Premier has no one to point the finger at but himself, end quote. How true, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I found it sad today to watch the Premier somehow try to say it was the Leader of the NDP's fault and the Leader of the Liberal Party's fault that we find ourselves here today still waiting for a budget. I have to say, I really do find it sad. And I'm sure that the nightly news tonight will reflect that, and it'll be reflected by Nova Scotians very shortly when they have their opportunity to be able to judge that. So after 10 years in office, Mr. Speaker, you have a government that's grown tired. It's grown out of ideas. The Minister of Justice has offered to resign. You have the situation going on of embarrassment on almost a continual basis. And yet now, all of a sudden, it's the opposition's fault for the situation we find ourselves in. So he ends her column by saying this, quote, but had the government recalled the legislature last month, Nova Scotia could either have passed a budget or been nearly through an election campaign by now. Either way, the province would have been better positioned to begin accessing federal stimulus programs, plus get its own programs underway by now. Instead, we have a Premier complaining about opposition leaders putting politics before the economic health of the province and its people. The fault for that lies squarely at McDonald's feet." End quote. So, Mr. Speaker, I can't think of a better way to summarize my thoughts on what we find ourselves, the situation we find ourselves in. I believe that that's a reflection of the thoughts of Nova Scotians. Until the Premier can stand in his place, or the Minister of Finance, and give Nova Scotians a legitimate excuse or any excuse as to why it's taken this long, I think the credibility of the Premier and the credibility of this government is right. It is right for Nova Scotians to call it into question, and that's why it's our belief that it's time to let Nova Scotians pass judgment on the decisions that have been made by this government in waiting so long to address the economic crisis existing in the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise in my place here to, it's quite ironic. I'm going to respond to some of the comments I've heard from the members opposite, and I got to begin by, Mr. Speaker, by saying I find it very strange that all of a sudden business community in Nova Scotia have these newfound friends across here who, Mr. Speaker, I think if you ask the business community in Nova Scotia are scared to death of them. Business are scared. And Mr. Speaker, they very well should be, because there's no riskier bunch in this province, Mr. Speaker, than set across there.
Ontario.
And Mr. Speaker, I just want to give them. Mr. Speaker, I just want to give my colleague opposite something to think about while I'm speaking, because I'm sure he'll respond to this. I heard the honourable member for Richmond talk about this government and how slow we are getting the budget and getting before the House. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind them, I think he was a cabinet minister in 1999, a Liberal government. When did they introduce the budget in the budget address? 1st of June, 1999, Mr. Speaker. Now maybe he can answer it. Well, we're so late. Mr. Speaker, a year ago. Mr. Speaker, I as well want to say that I want to commend, Mr. Speaker, employees who are in my department, in the employee of NSBI as well, Mr. Speaker. Well, although the members opposite, I know maybe don't agree with this, but I put a tremendous amount of respect, tremendous amount of respect for them and the work they do on a regular basis every day for business in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. I think they deserve a lot of credit. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, those of us who were in the economic and community development business, we're talking about developing new products, talking about new opportunities, hiring new people, and expanding markets. Mr. Speaker, that was the world a year ago here in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, it seems the only people in the whole province of Nova Scotia that don't understand that things have changed are the people sitting across from us here. Mr. Speaker, where have they been for the last year? Things have changed, Mr. Speaker, and all they want to talk. Mr. Speaker, you know, I gave the honourable member. Mr. Speaker, I gave the honourable member the respect to listen to her, and I asked her to give me the same respect. I sat and listened to her speech, and I asked for the same respect, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, all of a sudden, Mr. Speaker, they want to talk about China, and they want to talk about wherever else in the world they traveled. I have no idea. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about Nova Scotia, the opportunities we're creating here in Nova Scotia. Never mind China. China's caused enough of a threat to Canada now when it comes to imports in this country. So you worry about China, and I worry about Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're facing a global economic downturn we've seen in 2008 has affected many of the strongest sectors in Canada and in the world. Mr. Speaker, the story is no different here in Nova Scotia. But you know, Mr. Speaker, there is one difference. Our province continues to outperform Canada in job creation. In March statistics, as the Premier said, Nova Scotia added 4,100 jobs over the last year. Mr. Speaker, while this country has seen a loss of 165,000 jobs. Mr. Speaker, as indicated earlier as well, Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan have seen increases in this past year, something we're very proud of. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, you should listen to this opposite because these are the facts. The honourable leader, who said earlier that we were afraid of the facts, which I wish he was here to hear this, who said that you know that we were afraid of the facts. Well, here are the facts, folks. The facts are we had a record high in Nova Scotia with more than 454,000 people working in the month of March in this province. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes, we've seen challenges, and our local business and entrepreneurs are facing those challenges. But many successful firms are finding banks, Mr. Speaker, are less willing to loan money to them. And I think I heard in the media recently, Mr. Speaker, that the Industrial Expansion Fund, which I'm going to talk about here in a few moments, I think the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has even suggested we do away with that. You know what that would do? You know what that would do to the business in Nova Scotia? You know what that would do to the manufacturers who they want to sit over there and talk about? Last year, $59 million through the Industrial Expansion Fund, Mr. Speaker, 70%. $40 million, where did it go in Nova Scotia? To manufacturers. You know where they would be today? Well, you know what? The honourable NDP member can say pork barrel, but you want to talk about established business in Nova Scotia who created jobs for decades and say they're taking part in pork barreling politics? Well, good luck to you, because they are good employers who have come to us and say they need help.
Saskatchewan smartened up and got rid of the NDP. Saskatchewan smartened up and got rid of the NDP.
You can call a business in Nova Scotia who have worked for years, paid taxes, created good jobs in small communities. Mr. Speaker, they can call those names to those businesses all they want. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, I have the utmost respect for those businesses and business owners in this province, what they're doing for us. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I've met with many of them since January. And they've told us time and time again, the Industrial Expansion Fund that's been, in fact, Mr. Speaker, let's just to recall a little history here, has been in place for decades. In fact, when the Liberal government was in power, they certainly used it. They thought it was a great thing at the time. Now they want to do away with it. But which is it? Which is it? Mr. Speaker, it's a good fund. It's administered by good professionals, great people who, Mr. Speaker, have the respect of this province and the government. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, they do a good job. And the Industrial Expansion Fund, Mr. Speaker, helps a lot of people, a lot of business. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, we as the government won't do away with it. In fact, we're expanding it, and businesses are very appreciative of that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in February 2009, as I said, we increased the expansion fund by $175 million, the largest increase in the fund's history. And it's helped several companies and created lots of jobs. In fact, Mr. Speaker, over the last 5 to 6 years, the Industrial Expansion Fund has created and maintained 11,000 jobs. Now, and you know, the ironic part, Mr. Speaker, is many of those people are in my riding. Sure they are. And they're in the riding of members opposite. So why don't you go home and tell those people that the Industrial Expansion Fund was useless. If you had your chance, you do away with it. And don't worry about their jobs. They'll find a job somewhere else. But the Industrial Expansion Fund has maintained and created those jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it's important that Nova Scotians know that.
Good manufacturing jobs.
Mr. Speaker, the Industrial Expansion Fund has helped numerous companies stabilize their operations, invest in new technology, improve their productivity and competitiveness. Mr. Speaker, we're proud of that. The increase of the fund was not made will only help support businesses ready to expand in new technology, but also to maintain current jobs. Mr. Speaker, we've seen many funds increase now because businesses understand that this year is a year of retaining what we have. And we understand it, Mr. Speaker, with challenging times. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about a few businesses that have taken advantage of many programs this province offers. The Business Development Officer of LED roadway lighting, for example, an innovative Nova Scotia company designs, develops, manufactures, and markets energy-efficient roadway lighting. What did he say? The $1 million loan from the IEF meant he could hire research staff and invest in technology. Exactly what we should be doing in this province, Mr. Speaker. In the Annapolis Valley, members across from the Annapolis Valley, Apple Valley Foods received a $1.5 million loan guarantee. The President said without this loan, the company would not be able to grow his business. And what do you say to it? Pork barreling. A $15 million loan, IEF Northern Pulp. Now, where would Northern Pulp be located? Who said pork barreling? Pictou County?
Pictou West.
It came from over there, Mr. Speaker. That helped protect that loan to IEF, the IEF Northern Pulp, protected 650 forestry operators, 800 indirect jobs. Mr. Speaker, that's 1,450 jobs either protected in Pictou County and Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, we're proud of that.
Whoa, I guess we are.
Mr. Speaker, through the efforts of NSBI and its payroll rebate, Nova Scotia has been able to attract some of the world's leading companies in IT, defense and aerospace, and financial services. We're attracting international players like Flagstone, a global reinsurance provider, Lockheed Martin, one of the world's top defense companies. And where they say it's the best place in the world to do business? Right here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, with the help of this government. Mr. Speaker, business communities throughout the province are making critical investments in their own competitiveness. Another example in Cornwallis, Acadian Seafoods in Cornwallis. They have developed expertise in a wide range of seaweed harvesting, processing, and product manufacturing technologies. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned earlier, Bradeen Tool and Die in Amherst, Cumberland County are going to create an additional 35 jobs, and they're working in the aerospace and defence sector as well. The province, through Nova Scotia Business Inc., is supporting the growth in a payroll rebate. And Bradeen Tool and Die produce a range of aircraft parts, components, and tooling for such things as fuel tanks, wings, and cargo doors. Mr. Speaker, those two young men who the Premier and I met last week are very proud of what they've been able to do, and we're very proud to be able to help them, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is at the forefront of innovation. Innova Corp is a driving force in the knowledge economy and innovation capital markets in Nova Scotia. Its internationally recognized business model has helped Nova Scotia companies generate over $278 million in export revenues and employ more than 1,440 people in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, last year alone. Mr. Speaker,
tell us more, Minister.
Entrepreneurial activity in rural Nova Scotia is alive and well. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite said this is just a story time. Well, maybe to them. To me, Mr. Speaker, this is very serious. This is very serious business. Mr. Speaker, well, you can call names all you want, Mr. Speaker. I take this very serious, Mr. Speaker. The job I have, I think, is one of the most important in government today. Business is looking for leadership, Mr. Speaker, not someone sitting across the hall making fun of it and heckling about what we're talking about here tonight, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Innova Corp received 121 formal submissions from entrepreneurs across Nova Scotia in an I3 technology startup competition, and that was just over a year ago. Mr. Speaker, we find examples of this right across this province. Medusa Medical Technologies is delivering electronic patent record software products and services around the world, Mr. Speaker. Moresoft Machines and Digby designs and manufactures products for the international packaging industry. LED roadway lighting, I talked a moment ago, has developed energy-efficient roadway lighting and is targeting international markets, Mr. Speaker, around the world. Prolocation of Sydney delivers custom prototype enclosures to the largest brand name electronics companies in the world. Mr. Speaker, these companies, obviously, with the help of this government, are globally competitive and very proud of our province, and we're very proud of them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our team in economic and rural development works with our partners, as was suggested earlier we should be doing. Mr. Speaker, if they took a little time and did a little research, they would see that the professionals in my department and NSBI are in fact partnering with businesses throughout Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we're pursuing sustainability, greening our business and our communities. We're improving the bottom line and making a positive impact on the environment. It is our goal, Mr. Speaker, to make Nova Scotia one of the cleanest and most sustainable environments in the world by 2020. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, something that's very important to business across this province, to residents and individuals, is a commitment made by the Premier in 2006 to ensure high-speed internet was available to all Nova Scotia. Hear, hear. We will complete the Broadband Rural Nova Scotia initiative this year, Mr. Speaker. This will only enhance our position to truly exploit opportunity when the economy begins to recover. Mr. Speaker, our communities are rich and diverse. Through the Business Retention Expansion Program, we're working with business at the community level to identify opportunities and help overcome barriers to their success. It is an especially vital program during these uncertain times, an important part of our economic growth strategy. Mr. Speaker, this year we invested more than $280,000 in provincial support for the BREE program, which is now expanded to all 6 regional development authorities across the province of Nova Scotia. Through $25 million in strategic investments last year, the Community Development Trust is now hard at work in key sectors, including the forestry, fishery, agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. This is funding is also helping to strengthen rural communities such as Cancel and Trenton. Hear, hear. I see, Mr. Speaker, telling me I'm running out of time. Mr. Speaker, I just want to end off by saying this, that, Mr. Speaker, we're, unlike the opposition, and I think it's pretty clear today, there's not a lot of confidence in our economy, our province, or our business people from what we've heard across the way here tonight. So unlike the opposition, Mr. Speaker, we're confident in our ability to increase prosperity for all Nova Scotians through economic and rural development programs and the Building for Growth stimulus plan. We are taking action And we're investing in our communities and our people for the future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I see I have 1 moment left. I just want to let you know that today I received word from a major construction company in this province that tells me this. If this budget does not pass, and this is not me saying this as a business owner, if this budget does not pass, in a month and a half he'll be out of work. He'll be laying off 700 people, and as well, countless hundreds of other indirect jobs. Mr. Speaker, those layoffs will be at the foot of the responsibility of people across here. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Pictou-East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, jobs are being lost in this province from north of Smoky right through to Yarmouth. And where are we? I think the Minister of Economic and Rural Development should be speaking to the Premier, because the Minister just said things have changed. The Premier said, let's do a comparison with the budget of this year and the date of it with the date of last year. That is a continuation of the head in the sand approach that has been taken by this government. You know, I hope that the Premier will, in fact, run an election campaign on one of his statements, that the people of Nova Scotia, or Nova Scotia, has fared much better than the rest of Canada. There are a lot of people in my constituency and throughout the province of Nova Scotia who do not agree with that. Run on that. Run on that. Run on that. You know, here we are, the last province in Nova Scotia to bring in a budget. The last fiscal update we had was in December. And here we are in a situation with the Premier saying in a speech a few minutes ago, I'm more concerned with this, I'm more concerned with that. The Premier is more concerned about trying to save the hide of this government. You know, people in my constituency and throughout the province just got a newsletter or a huge leaflet form piece of information about 20,000 jobs. That, incidentally, looked to me like a campaign piece, but it was paid for in publication and in mailing distribution, tens and tens of thousands of dollars going out in a cost to the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. Tens of thousands of dollars were spent on that. And a woman said to me the other day, I'd like to have one of those 20,000 jobs. I'd like to have one of those 20,000 jobs. You know, we are in a situation with just information released to us. The labor force in Nova Scotia decreased from February to March, falling by 2,700, or 0.5 percentage point on a monthly basis. Seasonally adjusted employment in the province also fell, dropping by 3,000 on a month-over-month basis. And these decreases were, in fact, concentrated in full-time work. We have an unemployment rate in Nova Scotia of 8.9%. And there are all kinds of people out there who are not included in that 8.9%. You know, we have a government in Ottawa that is not overly concerned with the average Canadian or the average Nova Scotian. From an EI perspective, I get so many calls in northern Nova Scotia in relationship to EI. You know, we have a situation where the government in Ottawa is not concerned about the average Nova Scotian and his or her family. And we have a government in Nova Scotia who over the last number of months is more concerned about staying alive than dealing with the economic situation in this province. And so many things. We have regressed so much in relationship. The word pork barrel was used. You know, when I look at the school construction list, a government that may have, goodness knows, hours or days left making commitments for the next 7 years, and making a lot of those commitments based on politics. A lot of those commitments are based on politics. Priorities of school boards are being totally ignored. We in this province, well, I'll tell you what ones I'm for, some of the ones I'm for, because the top of the school board list in my area involved 2 schools in my constituency that are not even mentioned in that 7 years. And